Hello, my name is Sebastian. I'm the head of data economy at Bitkom here in Berlin, and I do have the pleasure to now present a very kind of interesting panel to you, which is called More Similar Than Expected Data Offices in the Public and Private Sector. For this panel, I have with me Dr. Franziska Brecht, who is Chief Data Scientist and also head of the division ZB1 Data and IT Strategy at the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Also with me, I have Dr. Sebastian Werner, who is a principal consultant for data and AI at Thoughtworks Germany. Sebastian, welcome. And then last but not least, I have Faruk Tuncer, who is founder and CEO of Polyteia, sitting in Berlin. Faruk, welcome on stage. Wonderful, thank you very much for the water. So maybe it makes sense to introduce this just a tiny bit to give you an idea what we're talking about. So the panel is based on the idea, on the hypothesis that we see data offices, data labs kind of popping up, being created in different sectors, in different organizations. And you could wonder, you could ask yourself whether they are maybe more similar than you actually think they are. Put differently, what are the differences maybe between a public sector data office and a private sector data office? Is there even such a thing as a stereotypical data office? I don't think so. So I think this is super interesting, and I think it very much depends on the specific case. And maybe that's enough to introduce our thesis. Maybe I start with the first question to all three of you, starting with Franziska. Franziska, what is your background, and what motivated you to take up your current role?
Hi, so my background is in information systems. I did a PhD here at Humboldt University in Berlin. I also have a background in economics and econometrics. So I'm actually lucky to have both sides, the technical side and then the statistical side. I have some background in automotive. I worked in Detroit for an OEM in the Department of Cybersecurity, working on microcontrollers in the car, but then also in the CDAO, the Chief Data Analytics Office, analyzing vehicle data and also customer data. So actually, that was only maybe 8 years ago, and we were also analyzing unstructured data, so text. So that was actually a big innovation 8 years ago, which shows how fast-living, how fast-paced this technology actually is, right? So what motivated me to take up this role? Actually, I wanted to help shape this data ecosystem of the federal government, of our Ministry of Climate Change, because with data we can make a big impact. So I wanted to put my experience in academia, in the private sector and in the public sector interaction and create that data lab and make the federal government or our ministry more data-driven, so data-driven government, more transparent by supporting open AI initiatives, and also increasing data literacy, so we can enable our employees to work with data themselves.
Thank you. Sebastian, you're next.
Yeah, so I'm a chemical engineer by training originally, did my PhD in the simulation of complex systems, and have spent basically the last probably 15 years on the intersection of, let's say, modeling of complex systems, data, and you could say to a certain extent machine learning, AI, and IT systems. After my PhD, I spent quite some time in academia, like in the end, seeing how academia works from the inside. It's not like, I would say, the public sector, but it has some similarities. I spent some time in the chemical industry, leading teams of data experts, did some time in corporate strategy, had the chance to lead a corporate spin-off as the CTO and managing director. What motivated me to do my current role? What I've learned over the past 15, 20 years is that technology is only an enabler, and that to get solutions on the ground, you have to talk about processes and people as well. And in my current role, I'm in the lucky situation to work with organizations around the globe that are not simple. They have complex problems, they have complex organizational setups, and it's really, really fun to work with them to find a way to create value and to solve their problems, and not just theoretically, but make it happen.
Sebastian, thank you. Faruk, so you're next.
Yeah. Thank you. So I have a non-technical background, actually. So I studied public policy, and I'm interested in how governments work, and did that mostly in my master's. I've been in Singapore, where They founded a GovTech agency, so a government technology agency, already 8 years ago. We talk about that topic now this year in Germany. So I saw there what is possible if government is digital. And basically the main outcome is that if you digitize government services, you have lots of data that you can use to make your services better for citizens and make more tailored decisions, identify vulnerable groups and serve them better because you know more. And this was my motivation why I founded Polyteia. We're a GovTech in Berlin. We've built an end-to-end public sector data platform that serves municipalities, state governments, also the federal government in solving the most pressing data challenges to make better decisions. And my main motivation is that, if government is kind of a monopolistic organization, but highly departmentalized, right? It works a bit like municipalities do the same thing, but they're very autonomous. And we wanted to serve them, how can you put analytics into the hands of people that are super illiterate in data, that have low data competence, a lot of data, kind of work in the same monopolistic structure, but are departmentalized. And we took that challenge with Polyteia since 5 years. Yeah.
Thank you, super interesting. This was the introductory round. I think now it's time to dive into kind of the status quo of data offices to begin with. Maybe I start with Franziska here. Franziska, why is it the case that the German government now has data offices in all the different ministries?
So it all started with the Federal Data Strategy, which was published by the Chancellery January 2021. And it actually states that all the ministries, so 15 ministries and the Chancellery, so 15 plus 1, have to install data labs and have to name a chief data officer or chief data scientist. I think that term is used interchangeably. I'm not sure. There's 3 main goals. So it's to increase data literacy, so we reduce the dependency on external support, so our employees are able to interpret and to analyze their own data. It's to support data-driven government, so we can work more transparently, more efficiently, more effectively. And then the third goal is to establish data governance, meaning actually exploring, identifying what data we have internally in the federal government and how to exploit it to gain valuable insights. So the current status is to my knowledge, all ministries and the chancelleries have installed data labs, have named a data officer or chief data scientist. I think as of today, we have at least 70, if not more, employees, and we have a lot of people coming from the outside, so coming from the private sector, coming from academia, so we have plenty of motivation and expertise and some fresh ideas, which is great. And then some ministries are of course more mature than others because historically they've been working with data. So for example, the Ministry of the Interior, which has the Federal Statistical Office as their subordinate authority. So of course they have always been working with data, they have the infrastructure, they have a lot of experts. And then other ministries are more at the beginning. I think we are one of those that are a little less mature. So we have that great momentum right now because we just hired all those people, we named all those chief data officers. So we have a great spirit of collaboration on different use cases, on data sharing, code sharing. So I think we should really use it to make a really leapfrogging to make our federal government more transparent, more efficient, and more data-driven.
Thank you. Super interesting. I understand this is the federal level, right? So this is the level of the federal government, exactly, and the economics ministry is one of them. So now I'm turning to Faruk to understand, maybe, because you also, you work on different levels with different kind of agencies, public sector bodies, including the state and local level, so cities and community, different levels. Do you see a similar move there? Are they also trying to, do they have a data strategy, and then do they have these data offices? Is that something you see?
In the majority, they don't.
Okay.
I think the federal government is quite leading there with the data offices. I think they still have the same data challenges and also the same kind of people, but different resources, right? The federal government has more resources to establish this. I think each data office got 20 million or something, depends on which department. In the local level, this is more or less the whole budget for everything for a municipality. And they have to, of course, do much less, or do more or the same with less people. And I think that's the situation. So that's why we believe we will not see such things popping up in smaller or medium-sized municipalities, maybe also not in small to medium-sized state governments. And there they need other solutions that require more than just a data officer.
I see. Thank you. This is also interesting how it's differing on the level, you could say a bit. No, and it's not the same everywhere. Sebastian, now looking at you, also given that you have background in that you have worked with different industries, many different industries, and probably it's not the first time you've seen this kind of center of competence kind of notion, where you could say data offices may be one of them, maybe not. So we've seen center of competences in the past. Is this kind of a similar approach? Is it different? What do you think about this? What is special here, maybe?
I would say in the first point, there's a good number of similarities. Like historically, if you look in a lot of companies, there have been always departments that were, let's say, very data savvy. Give you an example. If you take an insurance, their, let's say, risk department was always the one that like knew how to work with data, and they know that for 100 years. So in a similar way, as we just heard the example from the statistics office, they also know how to work with data. So to a certain extent, you have these like little insular entities that know what they're doing, but there's other parts of the organization that are not that far. And if I look at a lot of the organizations I work with, I see a path. In a lot of cases, you start off with isolated silos. At a later point, you decide, hey, I want some centralization. I want to pool my resources and take all the people that have a certain knowledge of data and pool them in a central unit within an organizational unit and say, hey, they should realize some top-level use cases, they should push it forward. And then later on, what we see in many cases is you want to branch out again, because there's one big risk. If you like create such a data office, it's far away from the day-to-day use cases, because they're like in a center of excellence, they're in their ivory tower. They can like create their own culture, they can be far away, and that is also a risk in that case. So I would see a lot of similarities there with data maturity like increasing.
Super interesting, thank you. I think from also Franziska and Faruk, what you said before, you kind of have a similar idea of that there's at first you need to kind of centralize it a bit, and then you would like to see to kind of get others, other teams, other units involved. So maybe it makes sense to go to the next question here. Because already data maturity, data quality already came up. So now I'm wondering, of course, what is the level of data maturity that you see in your organizations? Maybe generally speaking, but then also maybe if you want in kind of maybe in a more concrete sense. So this is the first kind of pillar, data maturity. And then second is kind of how can we imagine a project in the public sector being like what is the duration typically? Because of course you can also think that there's different ways to approach problems between public and private sector, but maybe it's not so much the case, because I know about many kind of say 3-year projects that we see in private sector organizations. So what is your experience? Maybe starting with Faruk this time, yes.
It depends. So our projects are a bit different, but if you look at the status quo, data work in government is Excel, and maybe an on-premise hosted BI tool with someone data savvy. This is on average how it works. But this is because people usually are not like the types of risk advisory in the municipality. This is usually the financial people that hold the budget. They are a bit more data savvy. But data savvy means Excel. Again, this is not. I'm not writing a Python or SQL statement and a query on a database. It's Excel, it's manual work, and I think what we did, because this is the status quo, how can you jump to something different, that we say, okay, actually you need data products, not a data platform itself, but you need data products that revolve around domains, because you will always have this illiterate people. They will not suddenly be in 10 years data scientists, all of them, but they still have to jump from Excel to something more tangible that can perform better operations. And that's why you need to kind of productize certain things, certain queries, certain statements, so that this audience can work with the data like an analyst today, but without to write code, like the no-code, low-code move. And I think this is what we've done. And so our projects are usually a setup of a couple of months. We set up these queries, we kind of productize the way how to analyze financial data or demographic data, and then an illiterate audience can use this on an ongoing basis without have to consult us or someone else. This is kind of the goal.
I see. Franziska, do you agree with that to an extent?
Yeah, so it's a ministry, we do have some pockets of statistical happiness. So we do have a lot of economists, and they're using local tools. They're coding in R, in Stata. They're doing their own analysis, but we don't have a central infrastructure. So overall, I would say the data maturity at our ministry is pretty low, except for those little pockets, but it's not a centralized unit. It's more like, it's not something they do in their daily work. But we do have a couple subordinate authorities who have historically have been always working with data, especially the research authorities. So for example, the Federal Institute for Material and Research, the BAM, Bundesamt für Materialforschung, they're in research, so of course they do work with a lot of data. They do have an infrastructure.
Thank you, super interesting. So then now to Sebastian. Does this remind you of private sector kind of data maturity as well?
Very much so. And like, I want to build on like something that Faruk said, and that's the trend from like thinking in projects to going into a product thinking. And I think that's a key point, because like federal budgets, to my understanding, work very much on, let's say, long-lived projects, which means you take a definition, you throw it over the fence, which is exactly the opposite of what we've learned over the past, I would say, 20 years in how to deal with data. Where you say, hey, continuously evolving, continuously iterating, and also having these product teams very closely adhering to the business or business process that is there. And I think building on that, asking ourselves, like, is really a federal authority, is it thinking in, let's say, how it serves their customer, meaning the citizen directly, and that's like where there's a fundamental difference in a corporate. You can say, hey, you can draw back to, let's say, an ultimate business process, I don't know, order to cash or whatever you want to take it. Whereas like in a government, I'm not so sure about that. Meaning, taking these points together, is there really a thinking of citizen centricity when we deal with data in the federal government? Not so sure. But corporates struggle in the same way, making this move to customer centricity, thinking in their business processes, making sure it's not throwing a project over the fence into a center of excellence, but bringing these solutions close to the people that understand what's to be done. So similarities and some differences, I would say.
Super interesting, thank you. I think this already came up a bit, that there is a bit of a shift kind of from a like, how do I call that? Like to enable users more, to enable customers more, to actually support them, to actually kind of provide value, bring value. And so sometimes we see this being kind of capsuled or kind of treated as something as a data product. Now, like I think when you were talking about kind of going directly to the customer, you could even kind of discuss whether like the public administration eventually provides a data product to the citizen. Or like that could be a possible future. So I think with this goes a certain also maybe change in understanding and change in the role of the data office, but also of other data units. So I think there's something I came across some time ago, is that there needs to be maybe some kind of a shift from considering the data office as a cost center that is just difficult and needs to be done, and it's like IT hardware, to kind of making it more, turning into a profit center, into something that actually kind of benefits, contributes to kind of to business, or then public administration, which also has a certain idea of providing service to people. I think this is a bit of a paradigm shift, and so I had written down, what do you think about it? I think you all acknowledge that it is happening. What I would like to ask, though, maybe now spontaneously, is how mature is that? Because we have been talking about this for not forever, but some time, and we now see that this is more and more happening. But maybe this is just the beginning. No, maybe this is just kind of the first organizations who are doing that. Would you agree with that? Is it like already like a common? Is it already like a common thing we see?
I would say to a certain extent. Let's say first things first. I mean, just hiring a CDO or like establishing a data office won't change anything if there is no clear incentives in the entire organization to change something. And can give you the examples. There are some major multinational organizations that spend a lot of money on data offices and so on. But they were in the ivory tower. They were disjunct from, let's say, where the business actually is. And it did not change in any way how the senior stakeholders were dealing with data. Meanwhile, we see other organizations where leadership challenges each other with data and say, hey, for whatever argument you make, show me the data to back it up. And that's a cultural shift. And of course, to make that cultural shift, you already talked about, let's say, data literacy. You need to understand how data can back up your argumentation, how you can make better decisions with data. And I think that's of high relevancy also for our federal government to say, hey, whenever we have a proposal of whatever sort, let's run some models, let's crunch some numbers and find numbers we can discuss, numbers we can interpret, which is better than, let's say, a gut feeling.
Thank you. Someone wants to add something to that? Else I can also. Yes,
I think if you provide value to the user, the establishment is much more easy. For example, we do have a lot of consultation processes when making laws. So we publish drafts of laws, and then people, associations, whoever can comment on it. And we get something from a couple hundred to a couple thousand of comments. And someone has to analyze those comments. So if we say, okay, we can digitalize your process, we can partially automate the analysis, we can save you a lot of time, I think we will get substantial support from our departments. And actually that's the one of our use cases that works best, because people, employees are just working weeks and months on analyzing those statements. So if you provide value at the user level, I think, you will get very far with the data lab.
You can move the needle, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, duly noted, thank you. Maybe I would like to focus on you, Franziska, for a second, because now we already, culture was mentioned, and also there's, like, let's say there needs to be a different way of working with each other, like in a certain sense, to also kind of involve other people. Building on that, or kind of having that in mind, I know that there is something like a collaborative network between different data offices within the federal government, which is something I think is very interesting to have it like as a kind of regular and kind of established network. Is this super common between the ministries, and what are your kind of what are the benefits of this collaboration?
So we do have the data lab network, data lab collaboration, whatever you want to call it, and I think that's something fairly new in the federal government, because there's lots of opinions and interests, so there's quite a lot of conflict sometimes between the ministry, I would say. So this is, I think, this really full collaboration, openness, sharing code, sharing data, collaborating on use cases. I think that's really something unique and new we are currently creating. I think because it's such a push or such a shift of paradigms, installing all those data labs in a fairly short amount of time, within maybe 6 months or 1 year. So yeah, I think it's really exceptional, and it works really well. And I talked about this great, whatever, momentum, vibes, motivation, because I think also because we have so many people coming from the outside that are really intrinsically motivated to shape this data ecosystem of the federal government. So what we do, we do monthly meetings. We talk about like general issues, how to set up your data lab, how to run a data lab, technical issues, what kind of infrastructure do you need? Are you working on-prem? Are you working in the cloud? Is there private cloud, public cloud? But also on more nitty-gritty details, such as legal questions, public procurement law, whatever, you name it. So there's all those different topics we work on, and we all have the same or very similar challenges, very similar tasks. So I think there's a lot of benefit in those exchanges. So we learn from each other, we leverage the experience from other data labs. As I said, we share code, we share data. So I think that's a really great institution.
I think it's interesting, because also maybe just to share very quickly, because when I work in the role as a also a lobbyist with different ministries and different policy officers, for example, I usually, like, sometimes I get to talk with people from different ministries at the same time, but it's not like the general rule that like you can address that there's like one email address for a certain kind of dossier, for example. It's usually true. It's not how it works. So it's interesting. Sebastian, do you wanted to add something on this?
And I think one thing you mentioned that really struck with me is like, it's in the end the network effect. Like you need a critical mass to really gain momentum, and it's not only that you avoid reinventing wheels, you can share success, you can share your learnings, and that's like what a lot of large organizations in the not so public sector, meaning in the private sector, are doing. They're forming communities of practice as like kind of like the, depending on how you look at it, the horizontal or vertical organization, where you say, hey, people that have similar roles, similar challenges, should form a strong network to support each other and to push things forward. So I think that's a really great idea.
Maybe Faruk, also if you want to share something regarding this question, because I can imagine that you're often speaking with the respective data offices in organizations you work with, and that they maybe lack like a community of practice like Franziska was describing. Is that your experience, that there is not so much of such a structure that they can benefit from?
I believe there are not so many data offices that you can see that this critical mass is just starting in government. So most people that we work with are not trained in data analysis. They rely on pre-prepared data sets and structures then to work with that. And the best practice that they share actually, and this is of course the more larger audience, is how to actually interpret data. This is the biggest kind of group that I see. I see a trend here in, I don't know, I look at my population data from the citizen registry. Can I trust it? Is it valid, or do I have to compare it to the statistical office, which is 2 years behind? But still, those are the questions. It's rather not, how to build a certain query in a more efficient way. I wish we would be there, but I think we are not yet there in government.
I see. Okay, so we had an idea now about like the kind of community building, best practices sharing a bit. I think what I understand, like it's not a but I do understand that this is still between more or less like-minded players. No? So we speak about different data offices that all have a similar mission, that all maybe share the same issues or challenges. So how do you get this kind of scaled to the whole organization? We talked about this a bit earlier, but I think I want to go a bit deeper into this again. So how do you get the support that you need? Because we mentioned providing value. We mentioned also, Franziska, you gave a great example, I think, about actually making life of other people easier. No? Is there more to this? Like, what is the golden recipe to create this kind of acceptance within the organization for a data office? If there is such a thing, what would you tell someone who is now creating a data office? How do you provide value? How do you show value? Who wants to start?
I would start.
Please.
Let's say the first thing is make sure that there's a shared goal. That sounds so simple, but it's actually, if you ask 10 people in an organization that are working in an initiative, that they should define the goal of what their organization is about, you will get 10 answers, in my experience. So creating a very clear shared goal and a shared vision among the people that are behind you. Second part is you need very strong support and buy-in from the very top. And that means, if I'm looking at the public sector, I can encourage everybody in the auditorium, call your representatives and tell them they should support open data, that they should support data initiatives. Because right now, the pressure is like this, I see a little bit nebulous, yeah, we should do digitalization. But like the pressure should also come from us as citizens, so that support is created from the top. The third part is you need to remove friction. You need to make it easy for people in organizations, meaning in this case in the public sector, to like do their data analytics. And that it's part of the culture that for whatever you do in your day-to-day life, you think of what data are you creating and how it could be used in a secondary way. Meaning documenting it right from the very beginning, making sure that all the data, of course, given privacy restrictions and so on, is published and made available in that point, then you can create value. And if these three things together, you're already at I believe, in a pretty good starting point in making your data initiative, no matter if it's in the private sector or in the public sector, a bigger success.
What do you think about this? Do you agree with that? That it's about these say, 3 main goals, or that this is kind of, it's definitely helpful. Do you see others? Do you see a different priority?
Yeah, I would totally agree. Let me just add one more point. From our experience, customer involvement is key. So we're not doing projects anymore where we don't have a significant customer involvement, and customer, I mean internal departments, user involvement. So we need a product owner, we need someone who can test our software, so we want to develop small, iterative, user-centric solutions, and in order to do that, we really need that significant customer involvement, which is not, it's not inherent in the public culture administration. So that's something we always demand up front. If someone approaches us saying, okay, we got this data project, can you support us? And we're saying, yes, we can, but we need to make sure we get those resources from your side. So that's one of our learnings, that we need to make sure we got a close collaboration.
Do you have any thoughts on this? Like, is this what you Faruk, what you see with the with people you work with, how they kind of run or kind of also get the traction that they want, also to get in touch with you, maybe, no? Like I imagine there is a certain process that needs to happen before there is a discussion around, for example, getting in touch with Polyteia as an example.
Yeah. I mean, I can just speak for the public sector because we just operated there, and I've not run a data office, but I think if we wait for people to approach us, that won't work, right? It's not an offer, a voluntary one, because data already scares people, or the word scares people, because it's not connecting to my task, as you said, right? What's my business task? My business task is to budget. And what do? In this budgeting task, I have reporting tasks, for example, which I saved as reporting tasks, but are actually data related. And nobody would say, I'm doing data work there. They'd say, I write a report and I compile a report. I think that's so we flipped it, so we do sales. So we say, hey, do you write reports? How do you write them? How do you work? Oh, you do Excel. Isn't that painful? Yeah, it's painful. How many months do you kind of work on that? Yeah, 3. I hate it. And then I had one session where actually the policy advisor said, after seeing your demo, I don't want to do this task anymore. Because he had to do it the next week. And I think this is kind of the way we should approach. So data officers kind of selling the problem, not the solution, right? So that you can get them into the funnel and then talk about their tasks, basically. Yeah.
I see. Well, all right. Maybe maybe it makes sense to change direction a tiny bit before I have a closing question left. My closing question will, of course, be what is the biggest similarity and the biggest difference? But maybe before I go into that, I have another question that is maybe a bit harder to answer, but maybe it's like I tried to answer it, I struggled a bit. And that is how public and private sector can learn from each other. But I have one condition for giving an answer, which is it has to be both directions. It cannot be, so it has to be both directions. What could that be? I think it's quite a tricky one, actually. Who wants to go first? Who has something to offer?
Maybe let me start with 2 points. I think what we can learn from the private sector is work more customer-centric. We already talked about it. So to get that understanding that we are a service organization, service to the citizens, to companies, and then working according to KPIs so we can actually define success, which I think currently we don't quantify. I'm not sure if we even qualify success, but that's one thing that we can really learn from the private sector, I think.
I would say I would go the other way around. I think what we can say, what we can learn from the public sector is that moving fast and breaking things, which is often done in industry, is a very tricky thing when it comes to personal data. And so we as Germans, like we often criticize that in terms of digitalization, we are very reluctant to go forward. And what we're seeing right now in a lot of fields of artificial intelligence and machine learning is we did not really think through what the impact on privacy, security, and so on is from the beginning onwards. And sometimes just taking that step back and saying, hey, yeah, we've run this first experiment, but we now really need to think through how that impacts the personal freedom, the rights that are like given us by like GDPR and whatsoever. And so to taking that step back, which of course means it may hinder innovation in the short run, but I think on the long run, it offers a possibility to build technology that is in the end serving the customer, meaning the citizen or like whoever it is, way better.
Thank you. Faruk, what do you think?
I want to emphasize on that actually. I think, so we are a hybrid, right? So we are a private sector company working for the public sector. What we learned actually from the public sector, because they forced us to, was to build something that actually complies with public sector standards, which is, don't host it on some foreign servers. We have to run it on a German cloud. Treat the data very sensitively. It was always from day one a big topic. Breaking, as a startup, we really mean that. If you say we move fast, break things, we didn't do that. Could not do that. We're probably the only startup that could not do that. But it was for the better because we now have built a product that maybe also be interesting for critical infrastructure companies that work with very sensitive data from their customers or have very sensitive stuff to protect. So we are kind of already positioned for that, which is also part of because we work with governments so closely. I think that's something government can also bring forward.
Now I would add more point to say where the government can learn is I think you hinted on it. Testing things early, which means whatever office has an idea on what to do with data, to offer a very easy path to a testing or path to production. However, as I said previously, there needs to be a check on the guardrails that you don't go in, let's say, forbidden terrain in that way.
Let me just add to that. From my experience in the private sector, I think many private sector organizations are working more on like a risk-based approach. For example, if you check for compliance with GDPR or with IT security, whatever you name it, which might work better in a lot of cases. What we do in the public administration, work on that compliance-based approach. So before we start any project, we sometimes even need months to check with IT security, to check with GDPR, to check that, well, there's a lot of people who want to be involved and who want to check our plans. And sometimes they don't have any technical background, so it's very difficult to communicate what we want to do. And I think it would be easier, instead of checking checkboxes, we did check with those people to actually do a privacy impact analysis. What happens if the data gets out? What happens if we can combine it with different data? So I'm really a big fan of that risk-based approach, but we do need technical experts to be able to do that.
And I think that's an important point that you say that, because that also means that there is more mixing between the private sector and the public sector. Not that you basically start a career in the public sector and stay there for the next 40 years, but it goes in both ways, I believe.
Yeah.
I have a question here about hiring and skilling, but I think we don't have the time to put it. Well, I think so to try to close this and to try to give a last question, just a very short round. So I imagine a public sector and a private sector data office that has been created some time ago. What is similar, what is different between these two? Is that something, does that question even make sense? But I had it here, so I want to address it.
I would say there are more similarities than it foresees. Like, government, to my understanding, is a complex organization. If you look at multinational enterprises, they're also complex organizations. And based on that, some challenges are very similar. Change management is never easy. Germans like change, but everything should stay the same, and that absolutely applies to this one here. If you think about the common picture of, let's say, a civil servant, it's not that he or she is someone who adapts very quickly to new technology and so on. And that's also true in some large organizations.
That's a similarity. I take that as a similarity, yes. Yes, depending on the size, yes, of the.
I think there's a lot of similarities. I think maybe talking to the differences, I think in the public administration we are bound, or we have more administrative overhead, which is justified, but which is sometimes in the daily business a little difficult to deal with. For example, whatever, public procurement law, and then all the IT compliance requirements. And I think we just have a lot of, coming back to the check boxes, we have a lot of more boxes to check because before we start projects. So by definition, we can't break things, which is good, but it also slows us really down.
Maybe also to add on differences, because you mentioned so many points. I believe that the private sector will be more capable in hiring talent for those offices, because you have different schemes how to pay people, and this is in this very rare talent pool quite important. So I would say, to give it a positive spin for the public sector, that the public sector will have a core team in such an office, but rely on partners, on the ecosystem to help to bring that to life, what they want to do as goal.
Interesting. That is very interesting, because I wasn't sure whether I would get like very differing answers. I did get different answers, and which all complement each other. So I like that a lot. Thank you all three very much. I think we're pretty much on time. I'm happy about that, and I would like to again thank you for joining us today. Thank you for providing your insight and giving us the chance to have kind of a comparative view on data offices, which I think is not done so often. So that's why we wanted to do it today. Yes, thank you so much.